The following is an opinion piece about a fictional character. Please don't get mad and hear me out to the end. Let Peter Parker grow the hell up. In 1962, Spider-Man was introduced to the world. Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, Uncle Ben, great responsibility. I'm pretty sure you know the rest. The big, significant thing about his origin story, to set him apart from much of the other superheroes at the time, was that he was an awkward loser, a high schooler who had no social skills and was on his own, not a sidekick. That is generally how the legend of the Spider starts, in high school. But what many people seem to have embarrassingly wrong about the character is that the story never perpetuates in that area. Because in Amazing Spider-Man 28, in 1965, just 3 years later, Peter Parker graduated high school. It proved his story could evolve. It was never a story about a high schooler or a kid. It began as a story about a boy facing the hardships of being a high schooler and a superhero, but soon evolved into a story about a boy becoming a man and how those hardships still followed him. Peter Parker was in college for an even longer period of time, but even then, that was still a period that had to end by Amazing Spider-Man 185. After that, Peter continued working for the Bugle until finally settling in as a teacher, but he was always an adult. Now let's wind the clock forwards to the last decade that we as a culture have just experienced, the 2010s. The two animated television series about this character released in this time span have all featured him in high school, never once straying out of that time period for more than 155 episodes total across the two shows. And the most known version of the character, the one in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the one defining trait to differentiate him from the other Avengers, he's a kid, just a high schooler. Then it tried to hone in that he's poor as a contrast with the other characters, never really worrying about money. No, one defining trait about this character is that he's in high school. We've already gotten 2 full films and 3 cameos in team-up films, all of which fill the need to keep him as a high schooler. Apparently this will continue up to the character's 3rd film, and honestly, it feels like such a waste, an excuse to fill the films with surface-level teen comedy. But even then, he has none of the angst, the edge, or the assertiveness that define teenage Spider-Man in the comics. He's only defined as a little boy who has much to learn and might be relatable just from the single position of his youthfulness. I actually had a bizarre conversation, not online, but in real life, with someone who was convinced that the entire point of the character was him being in high school. And I had no words for how insanely wrong that was. These movies are so mass appeal that they're giving general audiences this insanely close-minded idea of the character's potential. Look at this Infinity War poster. More than a kid doesn't even apply to the MCU version of the character. But do you know who it does apply to? The idea of Spider-Man himself. The relatability of Spider-Man should not be diminished into a single demographic to repeatedly pander to. It's a character that should be allowed to grow up with the audience, and grow into facing legitimate adult problems, instead of remaining in a state of static adolescence. Why do we have this problem? It's kind of this guy's fault. Brian Michael Bendis. In 2000, Marvel revamped their most popular characters into a brand new alternate universe. Most of the Ultimate line is dead and not looked back on fondly at all, but if anything came from it, it was Ultimate Spider-Man. When Ultimate Spider-Man first began publishing, this wasn't the 28-year-old married Peter Parker who had been spinning his webs in comic pages since 1962. No, this was a hip, 15-year-old Peter Parker, who didn't have a bunch of baggage. It was a fresh, exciting take on the character, where over his 160-issue run, he only grew 1 year older and then died at the age of 16. I feel the Ultimate Universe and its influence on subsequent Spider-Man adaptations is the reason Peter Parker is stuck in a state of perpetual puberty. Poor guy. And here's the thing, I like the Ultimate comics. It was a fun, concise Spider-Man story that was easy to catch up on in regard to the half-century-old mainstream 616 comics. There are some fantastic ideas and writing in there, but because of its success in modern feel, it's become the default Spider-Man template. That is a bad thing. Before Ultimate was a thing, pretty much all Spider-Man media and adaptations featured him in college or as a young adult. The Sam Raimi Trilogy was actually immensely faithful in the way it only had him in high school for the first half of the first film, and then left him in college for the rest of the trilogy, thanks to those films only having a minor influence from the Ultimate Comics, seeing they were just then coming out. But now, everything has changed in the post-Ultimate world. This effect even reversed back into the mainstream comics adult Spider-Man. He used to be a mature, married man who had to deal with his own adult problems. But after Marvel Editorial screwed everything over with One More Day, erasing the married life of Mary Jane and Peter Parker, they threw him back as some guy living with his aunt, perpetually acting like a teenager, even though he was in his late 20s. It was basically them regressing him as much as they could back to the high school status quo without actually rebooting him literally in high school. Thanks to writers who go in weird places with the character, it's taken years since that point for him to finally start feeling like the character we lost in 2007. Even as much as I'm enjoying Nick Spencer's current run on Amazing Spider-Man, I still feel Marvel Editorial has a hand of doom over the character. Peter Parker should be allowed to evolve as a person, and I don't actually have a problem with him in high school sometimes. From 2008 to 2009, my favorite Spider-Man TV show, Spectacular, aired, and it had high school as its entire setting, but it doesn't use that as an excuse to act immature. On the contrary, it blends elements from future Spider-Man stories to make it feel immensely more adult than anything the MCU or any shows to follow has ever attempted. Here's a question. What are far and away the best adaptations of Spider-Man from the 2010s? In my opinion, you can disagree, but let's just go with this for the point of the video. Here's a hint. They both came out in 2018. Both were critically acclaimed, and both were free of a high school portrayal of Peter Parker. Spider-Man PS4 and Spider-Verse gave me personally everything I've been looking for from a Spidey story since the Spectacular Spider-Man ended. In PS4, Peter Parker is dealing with life as a post-grad student, and Peter B. Parker from Spider-Verse is a middle-aged, divorced, and depressed iteration. Both are executed brilliantly. Neither are in high school. Sadly, there are only two examples, and are yet to be proven as any standard for the future. One of them isn't even the main character of the movie and is shown as an alternate universe version, but also both of these adaptations still have the great idea of being able to incorporate a kid still in school. In a Spider-Man story, if you must appeal to that certain high school demographic, Miles Morales needs to become that default character. That's what I hope for the future. We've had enough high school Peter Parker stories in the past 20 years for a lifetime. Miles is the perfect character to take over to embody that youthful relatability and tell the story of a kid struggling with superheroics, so that Marvel can let Peter Parker get married again and begin to grow old. Former bad Spider-Man writer Dan Slott once went on an insane diatribe about how Peter and Mary Jane's marriage will never be reinstated thanks to Marvel Editorial, and that everyone reading the book has forgotten it ever existed. Keep in mind that Dan Slott is a weirdo who said Peter's love for MJ was anti-Marvel, but if what he said is true, that is completely awful. It's not just about marriage, it represents a disturbing mindset that Marvel will not let the character grow to any point without forcing it to regress horrifically. And as long as the mainstream comics have this mindset, I worry that the major adaptations will always be stuck in high school limbo. But I feel they shouldn't have to, given the popularity of Miles and other versions of the character that aren't Peter. Let Miles worry about tests and first crushes and lockers. Let him be the surrogate to tell those stories. Let Peter worry about taxes, about supporting a family while still fighting crime and supervillains. Let him have a baby to worry about and show that kid growing up in the mainstream comics. Make adult Spider-Man stories that can be adapted into feature live-action films. Most importantly, let Peter Parker grow the fuck up. Thanks for watching my video. If you have any thoughts about the development of Peter Parker, feel free to post them in the comments, or if you've watched this to the end and still want to be angry at me, also leave a comment if you want to. I can take your hate. Like the video if you enjoyed this, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you feel sufficiently inclined.